Hi, welcome everybody. This is I'm going to open up a joint work session for the Coburg Planning Commission and Coburg City Council in order to learn about the master planning process. This is an interaction between staff and the elected and appointed officials so that we can learn as much as we need to know or more about the processes that will go on for development so that essentially to help us make better decisions on land use planning in the upcoming meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
At the last hearing, there was a lot of questions raised by the counselors, as well as citizens regarding the impacts of a light industrial use on the other side of the freeway. What tools the city had to control that type of development. So staff put their heads together and we decided probably the best way to give you a perspective on the tools that your development code gives you in regard to development that goes on the other side of the freeway and that might be zoned light industrial. So we put together a hypothetical for you. I'm going to start this. Hypothetical is based on a proposed development, a sarsaparilla bottling and distribution plant. For those of you who don't know what sarsaparilla is, it's sort of the prelude to root beer. Popular in the 1800s. Now, the plant that was proposed is on a 107-acre parcel located east of I-5. It's in the urban growth boundary outside the city limits, lies within the interchange access management plan, is designated industrial by the Coburg Comprehensive Plan. The proposed building pad is over 400,000 square feet, and 26% of the lot is proposed to be landscape. Now, to approve this plant, the third step of a concept plan regarding the lot to be developed and what the development code says contemporaneously with the submission of a concept plan is the adoption of the master planned development zone, the overlay zone that goes over the property. Following those two steps, there would be a subdivision or partition of the property, which would create this particular 107-acre lot. Following that, there would be site review approval, which would be required. And then finally, the applicant has to come to the council with a final development plan. That development plan represents all the previous reviews that the development had to go through. Task 1 and 2, the annexation and the initial rezoning to light industrial, would be processed concurrently through the adoption of a single ordinance. The next steps, which is the PDA overlay zone and the concept plan, would also be adopted by ordinance because the development code says these are a type 4 procedures, legislative. And then following that, the tentative subdivision plan and site review permit would be processed, and that would be under the normal quasi-judicial process. Before, please. There we have the conceptual lot. It shows the building pad, has some information about the impervious surface, landscaping calculations. parking would be located, etc. We didn't want too detailed a plan because we're really focusing on the process, not the actual development itself. So now we're in the time when the city looks at the concept plan. And the first thing the code requires is that the concept plan contain a number of different factors. First, the applicant has to basically describe the character of the proposed development and why they made various choices for the layout of the development. The second, they have to provide the city with a development schedule, the dates of construction, development. If there's a phasing, the phasing has to be presented to the city. Of course, that helps the city know when it has to develop or devote its resources to the development process as staff tracks it. The third step, which is a little confusing, is a narrative report documenting a modification of standards. And there's a section in the code that allows some standards to be slightly modified, basically by up to 10%, such as lot coverage, the amount of impervious surface, reduction in open space, increase in vehicle parking spaces. Again, this modification can only increase or decrease those standards by 10%. Now, the confusing thing about this is actually the modification request doesn't really happen until at the very end of the process, when the applicant comes in with a development plan and says, well, in our concept plan, we had so much landscaping, we would like to reduce that by 5%. And at that time, that's taken care of. However, the way the development code is written, they have to give you early warning if they know about it, what modifications they'll be requesting in the process. The applicant has to provide the city with special studies done by qualified professionals. Here we're talking about traffic studies, geologic studies, noise studies, environmental studies, natural resource studies, any type of study that is going to be necessary to determine whether mitigation measures have to be. The applicant has to provide the city with an existing conditions map so that the city knows where major vegetation is currently located, where the wetlands are. It doesn't work when you see the development plan and the property's been cleared. You have no way of knowing whether the applicant has preserved to the best of their ability the significant vegetation or other resources. So up front, they have to provide you with basically an inventory of what's on the property now. A conceptual plan that shows building envelopes, circulation of traffic, open space, utility connections, et cetera, et cetera. And this information should include area calculations so the city knows that the standards of the code have been met. Grading plan, where extensive grading is anticipated, and the site planning process, any development sites greater than 1,000 square feet need a grading. We know upfront that this applicant will have to provide us with a grading plan. And that means showing the location, extent of the grading, changes to contour lines, slope ratios, slope stabilization proposals, if that's necessary, location and height of retaining walls, et cetera, et cetera. This also includes surface detention and water treatment plans that might be necessary. Next, the applicant has to provide the city with information regarding landscaping. Again, what existing vegetation will be retained? What are the general planting areas that they're going to develop further? So an extensive landscaping plan is required. As a part of the concept plan is also a part of the site review. you'll see a lot of these different processes overlap. The applicant has to provide an architectural concept describing the architectural style being used for any buildings, building heights, the type of materials that are going to be used. And there's standards in the code, design standards that they need to be aware of. So we've got the information for a concept plan, and they develop a concept plan. So there's basically 4 steps to approving the concept plan. The first is that it needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. That means they need to take into account sewer and water master plans, the transportation system plan, and when it's adopted, the interchange area management plan. All those plans have to be figured into the development, and the development has to be shown to be consistent with all those plans. I went through the comprehensive plan to see which policies might apply to this property. Identified at a minimum 52 comprehensive plan policies that would be applicable or might be applicable. 10 goal 5 policies, a number of about 8 goal 6 policies, transportation, the economy, urbanization. They have to preserve public vistas and views from the Coburg Hills, retain existing vegetation along natural vegetation ways. Has to be in accordance with DEQ quality maintenance plans. The city has to coordinate this development with DEQ and LRAPA. It's not a it's obligatory with the city. So that's built in to the process. Sources of noise and water pollution have to be controlled. Buffer needs to be required between industrial areas that abut a residential district. And then there's a goal 14 policy that to preserve the rural character of the city, only light and campus industrial uses are allowed. That you'll see a thread through the comprehensive planning process about protecting the character of the city. And the last policy in goal 14 says is that doing that is applying either light industrial or campus industrial zoning. Either one can be used to protect the character of the community. So that's the first step. They have to show how their development is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all the functional plans that are relevant. Second, the development has to be compliant with land division standards. In this case, the developer has proposed to subdivide the property. Do you want to show the subdivision map? That's the 3.
Slides.
Looking for the graphic. I'll do a summary. The applicant has chosen in this case to subdivide the property. Subdivision process allows them to divide the property into lots. We're talking about lot 1 of they're proposing 4 lots, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute why that's probably not appropriate in this case. The subdivision process requires the applicant to prove legal access to the properties, provide functional access plans, and provide necessary easements for not just utilities, but also access and other purposes. Flood hazard determination is also made during this process. The applicant has to prove that the required utilities are available to the properties, at least the properties subject to be immediately developed. May require the applicant to provide drainage plans and create drainage ways. There's the examples there, I believe, is that right? It's the whole property? Okay, and that shows 4 parcels. One is the first lot, the lot that we're really talking about is 24.5 acres large. Lot 2 is 55, lot 3 is 20, and lot 4 is 2.78. And if you remember, every development on the other side of the freeway has to be a minimum of 20 acres. So right away, we have a problem with this proposal, this subdivision. The reason they did that, at the small lot 4, was that because of the interchange plans, access to that other development between this lot and the freeway is going to be cut off. So this process is going to have to provide access to that property. And that's why there's a road between lots, I think it's 4 and 3. They can't do that. They can't create a lot that's only a couple acres in size. So what we would say as staff is that you basically only need a partition, create 3 lots, and lots 3 and 4 would be 1, and they'd just be divided by a road, but they would be under a single ownership. The second problem is that lot 2 is 55 acres. And what the subdivision ordinance says is anytime that you have a lot that's more than twice the minimum lot size, you have to basically do a shadow partition or subdivision, show how it can be developed further in the future. So, and by the same token, show that you haven't prevented the ability to develop that property in the future. In this case, we have an issue with, I think, wetlands in the area. So I'm not exactly sure how they would redevelop that large lot, because I think a large portion is subject to some wetlands. Again, that's an issue that would be worked out during the subdivision process. And the subdivision process wouldn't end until it was worked out. So after we've gone through the land division standards, what the code says is the next approval standards are found in Articles 7 and 8 of the code. Article 7 is the article that has all the zoning districts in it. And within that, all of the setback standards, et cetera, et cetera. So we would go to the light industrial section. And first we would see whether a sarsaparilla plant is a permitted use or a conditional use. In this case, manufacturing and assembly and soft drinks is a permitted use. So that's okay. We can move on from that point. There's maximum height standards in the lot requirements in terms of size. Minimum yard requirements that we have to see that are observed, parking and design standards as well. Article 8 are the supplementary district regulations. And these go into a lot of detail. Access management, vision control. So as they're proposing the development, you have to make sure that there's enough visibility at the corners, the intersections. All the structures that are proposed have adequate access. Parking regulation, there's a lot of regulations dealing with parking, off-street parking, the amount that's required, how you calculate those, how you take exceptions from those. Bicycle parking, they have to address bicycle parking because they have more than one bicycle space for every 7 motor vehicle spaces. So they have to address the bicycle parking. Where are you going to put your bikes? Particular parking area improvements. That includes not just identifying the parking areas, but service drives, circulation, any lights that are proposed to illuminate access ways have to be shown. And they have to, of course, meet the design standards of the code. They have to address pedestrian and bicycle circulation. Sign regulations, they have to observe those. Street regulations, we're looking at the access road being a local street. So they have to provide planter strips, 4 to 8 foot planter strips on either side of the street. So 3 to 5 foot soft shoulders on either side of the street, and then 2 10 to 12 foot vehicle travel lanes. And that's the standard for a local street. Because this is going to be a dead end street, they have to provide a hammerhead at the end that would allow the fire department to do a turnaround, safe turnaround. And of course, there's standards for the composition of the street themselves. There's public works standards that they have to comply with. Each building in the subdivision has to be served by city water lines, as well as have adequate fire hydrants to serve them. Fences and walls, there's extensive code requirements for restrictions on fences and walls, depending on where they're located and what their uses are. Screening standards, especially where a industrial district abuts a residential district. Now, the property to the adjacent to the east is not technically a residential district. It's classified as a natural resource district by the land. Of course, the property to the west, adjacent to the west, is highway commercial. So technically, they're not residential districts, but there is a plan policy that doesn't say residential district. It just says you need to buffer residential areas. And you can do that even though it's not strictly required by the code. And I think the council has pretty much agreed that we have to look into buffering on both those ends of the property. Then finally, there's design standards that are really important in terms of the ability of the city to ensure that the character of the city is, or the development is consistent with the character, the architecture of the city. There's specific standards for how the frontage of the development is supposed to look. It's supposed to vary every so many feet so that it's not just one consistent blank wall facing the access road. So you have a lot of control over how that project is going to look. Now, not just the height or the area, but also the architecture that they choose. And of course, there's a lot of policies about being consistent with the scenic views in the area and how that area is going to look to the people on the other side of the freeway. So we've gone through the supplementary standards. And then finally, we get to site review. And site review really incorporates or could incorporate everything we've already gone through before. We're looking at, again, landscaping and drainage and signs, narratives. So if we missed anything with all those other regulations that we just summarized, they'll be picked up in site review. And site review clearly would be required of a development this size. Finally, there's standards in the code that would require basically bonding of improvements so that the city is guaranteed that the improvements will be made. They'll be made in a timely manner. And if for some reason they're not, there's money the city can draw on to complete the projects, the improvements themselves. So that's the quick and dirty. And you can imagine how long that would take for staff and for the applicant to acquire all that knowledge and put together a detailed plan. And again, in the final analysis, you will see a final development plan that's based on everything that preceded that. And you'll get to sign off on that, as well as the conceptual plan, the site review plan, any other plans that they had to submit.
Can you tell the audience what the process is? How many times does it come before the Planning Commission? How many times does it come before the council before we get done with it?
Well, there's a minimum. It has to come, the legislative actions that the council has to take, i.e. by ordinance, it's going to have to come before the city council at least twice. The Planning Commission, in those cases, they only have to make recommendations. But you see so many plans that have to be submitted as part of the concept plan and site review, of course, as well as the subdivision or the partition request. So I would anticipate a phasing by the applicant. I think the Planning Commission would be overwhelmed if they had all this at one time. And I assume the same would be for the applicant. They would put it together, this whole process in stages, and maybe the concept plan initially, and it would be a preliminary concept plan. And they would get the feedback from the Planning Commission, come back, make changes that are required. Same for the subdivision or the partition plan. So in answer to your question, as many as meetings as it takes.
Minimum of 4.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And you have to realize that the concept plan and the overlay zone are legislative, but the site review and subdivision are quasi-judicial. So they can be done concurrently, or they can be done on a slightly different schedule. Which would probably be a lot easier in terms of the timeframes that a Planning Commission and the City Council would be working in. If you had to hear a subdivision and a concept plan and an overlay zone one night, that would be a lot.
I've lived it. I guess one of the things that I really would like to flesh out in this is what the input is and what kind of input the citizens, and by citizens, I do mean the Planning Commission members and the council too, because we all live here. But the subjectivity versus objectivity of the development code. When you say the front of the building has to have so many breaks in the face of it, or we want something that's appealing, and however the code words that, how much subjectivity do the Planning Commission members and council and staff, for that matter, have?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, there are certain objective standards that they have to abide by. But the standard of, well, consistent with the architectural or community character is very subjective, which gives you a lot of flexibility. In the same token, it makes it incumbent on the decision maker to lay out what are the criteria you're applying to determine what is your character, which could be rather difficult, but you have to do it. If the more flexible you get to, the more criteria you have to develop. So the applicant knows what the standards are that they have to meet. The state will just kick it back.
Questions from commissioners or councilors? Process a few times myself. I really would like to get everybody to have a clearer understanding of just what that public input is. It's and what you've explained, Gary. I get it, but you explained probably 4 different major categories with sub-steps that are in those to meet the architectural, the land division, and the site review process.
But remember when I was talking about the contents of the conceptual plan right at the start, about the second standard was a timeline narrative, which is a great place to start, because if you know what they're going to be doing in the future and what are the different stages they're going to be going through, then we have a better idea of how the regulatory process, the approval process is going to go. And there's no reason why right at the start of the process, we create a timeline for the citizens, build in as many public meetings, hearings as we need. We usually, as a, my planner hat on and my hearings officer hat too, I always recommend to the developer that the first thing they do, besides maybe a pre-application conference, is to meet with the community, explain what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, get the feedback, and build in whatever concepts they can into their development right up front before they start the formal process, going in front of the Planning Commission, having public hearings. I would recommend the same to this applicant. Once they have a much firmer plan as to exactly what the development is going to look like, what are the various impacts, we have a community meeting. It could be hosted by the Planning Commission and or the City Council, or it could be just the applicant in an open house scenario. But these are the things we can front load the process once we have a better idea of what the timeframes and expectations of the applicant are going to be. We want to get our subdivision plan approved by such and such. Okay, so we back up from there and we build in all the public involvement we think is necessary, and the type of public involvement we want to have.
And so one of the things I want the public to know is that the city of Coburg has really pursued that type of process to get involved in the pencil stage. When we're drawing it up and we're talking to the developers and the neighbors as to what they want. And that has changed significantly since I've become mayor. And we actually have a process sheet where, like the residential developments, the Parks Committee gets involved in it before it comes to the Planning Commission, just to give that input. And obviously, I believe my council totally supports and has supported really pushing that public input up front on these development applications. Because I learned a long time ago, it's a lot easier to do when it's pen and paper rather than concrete. You have to get a jackhammer to fix it instead of an eraser. Yeah. Are there any, I'm going to keep asking, do we have any questions? I'm looking on screen now. Does anybody? Councilor Fox?
Yes, and I apologize for joining late. My question isn't about the annexation, it's about the business development plans for the businesses. and what we have in the code. And because I hear about each one has to come forward individually, but if they're following the code, then it should be fairly okay, regardless of all these meetings. And some of my concerns is tightening up the code. You know, one of my passions is light pollution. And I started asking questions about it because we do have elements in there of modern dark sky controls, of having down-facing light poles. And I think Camping World, which came in recently in the big scope of things, is a good example. They've got a bunch of 20-foot down-facing light poles. And on either side of them is one with 40-foot towers that I think have halogen lights. And the other one on the other side has them at all different angles, which are not allowed anymore. And obviously they're grandfathered in because they're part of the past. And you know, I would like to address those things. But moving forward, I asked, I didn't see any height regulations on the height of the towers, except in residential. It says no light above 20 feet. And then I heard, and I can't find it, that they can be 40 feet. And we also have a noise ordinance about decibels, but there's no regulation, or that I can, you know, I'm ignorant on all this stuff, of putting a noise plan in place prior or as part of the application, as opposed to being reactive and saying, wow, it's noisy, you're exceeding the noise code. So A, is that all in place? And B, why do we need 40-foot light towers? And those are the micromanagement things that I would like to have addressed at the forefront rather than reacting and asking questions later.
Well, in terms of developing the concept plan, a noise study is something the city can require. It's an example used by the code of the type of study that you can require the applicant to follow. There are a few standards for noise that I noticed in the supplementary district standards. I would strongly argue that if the council feels strongly that there are weaknesses in any particular area, those need to be addressed before the development application comes in. Once the application comes in, you're bound by law to process it under the rules, the approval criteria that were in existence at the time it was submitted.
That's the answer I expected.
I have a question
Sure.
regarding where does the negotiation,
Ron, could you turn the green light on? Thank you.
where does the negotiation come in with the standards of code? Say, and we ran into this a little bit with the Hayden Home Development, where they wanted to lower the porch heights. And basically lowering that porch height standard would go for all those homes within the Hayden home, that whole development. And it was my understanding the master plan development basically covered that whole development for each individual house. And in doing so, as I recall, and I'd have to go back and really go through the minutes and whatnot, but the Planning Commission listened to Hayden Homes about the porch heights and gave them slack on the porch height for a different standard of some other portion of the home, the way that was architecturally done. Is that process, how do we do that process?
Well, if they're asking for a modification
Right.
or an exception, then you have absolute approval over whether or not to accept that. If they're trying to take a variance to those standards, then they have some very tough, traditionally based criteria that they have to meet. So you have a lot of control over the administrative exceptions that are built into the code at different places, like the 10% of the lot coverage or building height or things like that. You don't have to approve them, but you have the administrative ability to do so. For major changes, they'd have to take a variance. And obviously, the final development plan is approved by you as well as the concept plan. So if you don't agree with the exceptions being requested, you don't approve it that way.
Well, to address Councilor Fox's concern about the light pole issue. And so they present a development plan or whatever else that shows 40-foot light poles. How can, where can we come back as part of either the city or the planning commission come back and say, we would like to see those lower, have a lower standard or at least not be as high?
Well,
can we, do we have such latitude to come to the developer and say, yeah, we would like to see this done?
Standards, of course, is the character of the community. I don't know if you have any dark sky requirements in the code or the comp plan. I don't remember seeing any per se. You do have these standards for the types of lighting that can be used. You do have standards that say that the lighting has to be limited to the areas that it's illuminating and focused on the ground. So the higher the lighting pole, the larger the expanse of the area covered, and the more likelihood that it's going to encroach on neighboring properties and be available. I think you have control over that.
That's only an example, but what I was looking at is the fact that we've heard a number of different concerns brought up about the development, whatever it's going to be, or your development for Sarsaparilla, for example. But are there mitigating things that we can do, the city with the developer, in resolving, getting some addressing those concerns, if you follow what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I do.
Be able to get some satisfying the citizens of their concerns in some manner, at least, if not all, but at least portion of it.
Well, you have to look at the standards that you're applying, the character of the community, not adversely affecting neighboring properties because of noise, light. There's standards for vibration. There's standards for noise in the code, not just your nuisance code, but in this development code. That gives you a lot of control and puts the burden on the applicant to prove to you that the way they're developing the development meets those standards, that they're not providing adverse impacts to neighboring properties. So, and that's kind of fuzzy. Again, there's a fine line between getting so objective that they have, no options at all. They either build it this way or they don't build at all, or no standards. And I think Coburg's comfortably in the middle. You've got enough comprehensive plan policies and policies in your development code itself that shows a concern for adjacent properties, for noise, for vibration, all those things. But they're not spelled out, very specifically. When negotiating with the developer on these issues, the city needs to provide good reasons why they're requiring a lighting pole to be 10 feet shorter. Okay, you can have more lighting poles, but we don't want any of them 20 feet tall because they're going to be visible no matter how you shield them off the property. Things like that. I think you have an inordinate amount of control over those sort of things.
So, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but when staff receives the initial plans, and they've already heard a lot of the concerns the citizens' concerns and whatnot about any development already. That time, the staff can really present, says, you're gonna let out pushback on these 40-foot light poles.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you might be prepared for that one, even though it's allowed by code. We're gonna hear about it. So
Yeah.
forewarned is forearmed type of thing.
And that happens if there's some community meetings, before the formal process starts. That's the purpose that we encourage and require, in many cases, developers to go through a pre-application process. We sit down before we receive the application. We tell them the facts of life. The council is not going to like this because of 1, 2, 3. It's likely that this proposal wouldn't be approved if this continues.
So to carry that even further, one of our mantras here is don't worry about the council and the planning commission. We need to worry about our citizens because we allow citizens input on this process. And that's very true. And I think the developer is very aware of that. We really believe that citizens, and we do have more than just the development code. We have ordinances, since hard learned about noise and light that are outside of the development code too.
Mhm.
Any questions on the screen here? I'm looking. Councilor McConnell?
I have a couple of questions. One of them was raised by a citizen at our last meeting, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to address it, but it seems like it is. They questioned whether a distribution company, beverage distribution company, could come in and use our water resources to package and redistribute water, and if it would have a significant impact on water usage for our residents.
Well, to start with, whatever development occurs has to conform to the master water plan. The Public Works Director knows the capacity of the water system and the limitations, if there are any, in terms of supplying the water, city water, to a use. I can't see any way the city would commit to a situation where they would provide water to a development to the detriment of the citizens. I'm speaking for myself as staff. I assume the city council.
I'm going to let our Public Works Director, Brian Harmon, address that too. And the fire chief next.
Yeah, I have real concerns about bottling manufacturers packaging municipal water and selling it as something, that's other than municipal drinking water. I think you see that around the country, and it to me, I would rather you just fill up a glass and drink it right out of the tap than buy a plastic bottle. But yeah, so to echo what Gary was saying, I don't see there ever being a day where I would be against it.
Our Chief Chad Mitter.
I'm just going to point out we've had that.
I can't hear.
Yeah,
Oh,
so you
sorry.
probably have to repeat it because you had a counselor not hear you.
Go ahead, do it again.
I just want to remind everybody, I don't know how many years ago, if anybody remembers, but there was an applesauce manufacturer, I believe, going to take over the Monaco site, if I remember right. And they were denied because of water usage, amount of water. So it's came up before, it's been issued before. It's not in the water master plan to provide that kind of water for an actual facility to bottle or use water. I think that's pretty much what Brian was saying too. We just don't have the infrastructure for that. And it was denied in the past because of that. So I just want to point that out. It's,
You know,
it's been here.
I'll add further to that. They weren't necessarily denied. We were in serious negotiation with them, and we were talking about whether we were able to provide water. And the way development works here is if we have to add to our infrastructure to support whatever that development is, they usually need to pay for that development. Not usually, they will pay for that development that is required to supply them. So that was a big issue. We were actually talking to eWeb to see if we could bring extra water over. It was a substantial negotiation. They determined that they didn't want to pursue it any further. And personally, that was a relief to me. Sir Fox,
So that,
Sir Alexander. Oh, sorry. Patty, Councilor McConnell?
yes, so that doesn't, I guess that kind of leaves me up in the air about, I mean, what Brian said, it sounds like we would not approve it, but what you're saying is that, well, we negotiated. So which, are we willing to negotiate something like that?
Process is, if they were bottling water and taking millions of gallons of water, I think it would be pretty easy for the city to say no. In their initial plans, they're going to have to give us some estimates of what they are. And the first part of that is the staff check on it, and our city engineer and our public works department would address that and give us the details as to what is needed. And it may not go any further from there because obviously we do have limited water resources. So it's a different world from what that was 8 years ago when we were negotiating with that applesauce company. Yes, is if somebody came in and said they wanted to use all the water that we're already using daily, they wanted to double our water capacity, I'm pretty sure we'd be saying, no, thank you. Councilor Fox and then Councilor Alexander, and then I see Ann. Councilor Fox, can you hold on a second? You're muted. Let me have Ann comment on this. I think she wants to comment on this point.
Normally, when we're getting interest in a piece of property that is a manufacturer, the first thing that comes in is a questionnaire. It's a question, and it's how much power are they going to use? How much power do they need? How much water do they need? How much sewer capacity are they going to use? And up front, our staff is talking to the engineer, talking to the public works department to say, can we serve this company? If they have an interest coming to Coburg, are we going to be able to give them what they want? And if the answer is no, then we just have to say, I'm sorry, you're not a good fit for us. And that's normal. That is a normal upfront process that, especially through Business Oregon, that's the first process that starts, is them checking in to see if the city has any interest in providing what they need. And there have been times when we have said, we can't help you. You're going to have to go to a bigger city or someone who can provide you the amount of water or the amount of power that you need. Hope that's helpful.
Yes.
Thank you. That's City Administrator Ann Heath. And now Councilor Fox.
Yes, my questions got answered. It was when I heard Brian's, it sounded like an environmental response, and I was getting at how much water they were taking. So no, I have no question.
You, Councilor Alexander.
Yeah, the infrastructure that's been brought over or being brought over to across or underneath the freeway, who pays for that?
You do. The systems development charges, the water fees, so the users and the systems development fees. So when a developer comes in, they pay a substantial amount of money to improve the infrastructure to provide the service for them. I can tell you, I just built a house in Coburg 3 years ago. The SDCs and permits were $21,000. So it's a substantial amount of money to offset what the city has to put in the infrastructure to provide that service.
Okay, and then also, go ahead, Brian.
I just want to clarify one thing. We did not solely take the water underneath the freeway just for development. We also took the water over there for the future reservoir that was supposed to be located up on the hill.
Right.
So
There's also already
Development
property
had it.
annexed over there without any city service water for 14 years now, I believe, and that was wrong. So we needed to fix that.
Who's
ahead.
responsible for the road that leads into the development?
Once again, the developer, and then they would, once it's built to the design by the city engineer and accepted by the city engineer and Public Works, then the city owns it after it's developed.
And are they only responsible for what's in front of their property or joins to their property? Or are they responsible for a redesign for the citizens up there?
They have to give, if you're talking about like Van Dyne Road,
Yeah,
there's already significant input and consideration for improving that road to handle the traffic from the development. And the IAMP is requiring that even outside of the city requirement.
okay. Okay, I thought so.
Our
How
state
acres
area
is,
management plan is the IAMP.
how many acres do we currently have as far as residential in Coburg?
Our chief mentor.
Your city is just over a square mile. You have, which a square mile is what, 640 acres? 207 of that currently, don't quote me on the number, is some kind of industrial land, whether it be North Coburg Road or North Coburg Industrial Way, Roberts Court, South Industrial Way, and so on. And then you have about 30% of that is RV spots, by the way. It's crazy that's that high, but it is. We have 5 RV parks. And then this would be another 100 and some acres. Can I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's good for now.
Thank you, Councilor Alexander. Councilor McConnell.
So just one other question. The traffic study, I have some concerns about that because of the traffic study that we had done before the Hayden Homes development came in, and it was supposed to be just really a wonderful study. And as it turns out, it didn't really address the actual traffic patterns. How reliable is the study we have had done on this project, and what level of trust can we have in it? I guess you would say.
City Engineer Damian.
Hi there.
You're under oath.
So traffic studies, they're fairly complex and they are generally big picture studies. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
They're generally put together for a big picture analysis and a future analysis, and they're not necessarily chasing each car around or whether somebody's going to turn around in somebody's driveway or speed through a neighborhood. The traffic study looks at capacity, future deficiencies. Can a road physically handle the amount of cars that are going to be on there? Similar to your transportation system plan, where it's really a kind of a big picture, 1,000 feet in the air look on, is this development going to cause an impact where there's unacceptable delay at a stop sign, or where you'll need to add an approach lane at a traffic signal to add the capacity to offset that. So as far as reliable or not, traffic studies in Coburg are required to be put together by a professional engineer that has special expertise in transportation. And that alone would make it reliable that it's been done properly. But the part that may not be so reliable is, I guess, the expectation of a citizen or somebody that just doesn't understand the purpose of the study. So an example that you're using for Hayden Homes, for example, I don't live next door and I don't get to see day to day what's going on with neighborhood traffic changes. But those types of changes are typically not measurable with science. That the traffic signal at North Industrial Way can be measured. You can look at the operational conditions of that traffic signal, how much capacity is being used, what is the overall delay at that traffic signal. And then you can add hypothetical trips to that traffic signal and recalculate it and show whether or not it's operating within acceptable standards for capacity and delay. You can look at safety, but that's always in the rearview mirror. What's happening out there today? Are there too many accidents at this intersection or something like that? But to answer your question, is it trustworthy? This one in particular, to me, it's very trustworthy just because I know the engineer that put the study together. She and I have been colleagues for over 20 years, and I just happen to know and respect her work, and I've seen the results from it. But as far as in your case, what's reliable, that may be something different. There will be an increase of traffic. They talk about a trip cap in excess of 600 vehicles during a peak hour. So on Van Dyne, if you live across the street, of course, there's going to be impacts. If you travel through the intersection, you may see more delay. However, the predicted delay is within acceptable standards for delay that have been established in your code, and also which is fairly typical industry-wide. So additionally, I'm not the only one saying yes, it's good, or no, it's not good. Lane County has reviewed the traffic study. The Oregon Department of Transportation's reviewed the traffic study. And then finally, it's also not the last study you will see. The one that has been submitted and conditionally approved is to many, it's mostly related to zoning, where they were looking at, okay, if this property develops, we don't know anything about what's going there yet, at least in the beginning. How much traffic can this interchange handle before it, yes, breaks, for lack of a better word, or before it becomes dysfunctional or jam congestion? And that number they identified was this 632 number. That, so because of that 632 number, the traffic study has been conditionally approved, which would be a condition of approval in the land use process, that this entire property cannot generate more than 632 trips without doing something such as adding that traffic signal on the east side of the interchange, or I'm sorry, the west side of the interchange. There's other things that would need to occur also. If for some reason the IAMP moves forward faster than expected and provides that extra capacity, then that's kind of an unnecessary condition, yet it would still sit there. And subsequent applications to add another facility in this subdivision has to start over. They have to start over with, okay, here now we have existing conditions. What do they say? And that includes the first lot. We want to add this much traffic for lot 2 or the second development. How much can the road system handle? So I guess with that 632 number, if they want to exceed it, they have to build the infrastructure to accommodate it. Or the interchange needs to be upgraded. Planned. So
Damien, when you say 632, it does sound like a big number, but last time I looked, 12,000 people use our interchange or exit a day.
Right.
So you're talking about 5%.
that sounds right.
Yeah. 632 sounds like a lot, but knowing the traffic myself,
sure.
I deal with it all the time.
The
It's a lot.
632 is a peak hour also.
Right,
It's
yeah.
in the commuter hours, 632 in that hour.
Right. Oh, sorry
So-
for the answer. It's just, it's not really cut and dry. Is this reliable or not? I mean, the short answer is it's a very reliable study prepared to industry standards by a qualified professional. Whether the fact that it says there won't be adverse impact to the transportation system that was evaluated, that it may or may not be technically, well, it is technically true. It may or may not be consistent with your perception that yes, there's going to be a lot of new cars.
Things I find is there's the acceptable standard by your standard as an engineer. And then there's acceptable standard by Coburg, which is about 10% of the accepted standard by an engineer. One of the things that I think is important that you mentioned is that this traffic analysis was reviewed by ODOT because of the IAMP and Lane County because they own the road, and then you.
And myself on behalf of the city, yes.
So it's been reviewed by 3 people after it was written. 3 organizations after it was written.
And as far as Coburg's standard being less or greater than others, that's something that I've mentioned in previous meetings when this same question comes up. It's totally in the planning commission's realm if they want to change that standard, and I would definitely look forward to helping come up with a more stringent standard if that's what the planning commission desires and later the council approves. But at the time, keep it reasonable enough to where it, just draw a line and there's no more cars coming.
But that only applies to city controlled streets, is that correct?
Your development code, under your development code and your
Doesn't
jurisdiction.
apply to the county road out in front here, nor would it apply to the interstate.
Correct. However, the county road, the county has their own process
That's right.
and their standard is surprisingly similar.
Right.
And ODOT has their own process and their standard, at least on the freeway, is actually more stringent in certain areas.
But we couldn't go ahead and set a standard. Planning commission couldn't set a standard for Willamette Street.
But you could set a standard for the side streets. You could set a standard for new intersections as long as they're city jurisdiction intersections. And just so you know, this isn't just Coburg. Like for instance, federal traffic signal warrants, they have 2 different types. Well, it's one big group of warrants. But if you're in a community of less than 10,000 population, those warrants change because the expectation of delay, smaller towns expect less delay at stop signs.
That's why we live here.
Yes.
That it? Question, Councilor McConnell?
Oh, partially. I'm concerned about where the traffic is going to end up when we know that it's going to be more than that probably is stated, as it generally is. And how do we funnel that through Coburg when we don't have any control over what's happening with with Willamette Street right now? It just seems like a problem that we're just kind of like, oh, let's just hope it doesn't get worse. I feel frustrated by it.
Understandable, of course. So I guess the as far as generally being more traffic than predicted, I with most respect disagree. I've been writing traffic studies for 25 years, and it's rare, if at all, that the national standards for trips generated by developments that are based on just thousands and thousands of data points are from reality when they're built. That doesn't mean there isn't an instance here or there, but those data points, again, thousands of instances, and they use weighted averages. And I would be-
Essentially,
I would
there's
be
a strong
surprised.
science behind it.
Right, there, I mean, this isn't the first beverage distribution facility in the United States, and we have very large publications with, I'm guessing there are thousands of similar facilities that were used to create that average.
I'll just throw in that traffic outside of any development is a concern, and the commuter traffic on the county roads that are within the city are a concern. And it'll be stated in the newsletter next month that's going to come out, but our staff and a couple of people right here, Commissioner Marshall and myself and Councillor Fox, are interacting with regional areas on transportation, making sure that Coburg's issues are heard by agencies that are responsible for these roads. In other words, Lane County and ODOT. And we've been working with elected officials and everything that we can do to be the little mouse in the corner that roars so that people pay attention to us. So it is a concern, and we're trying to address it. There's no quick answers. Transportation monies. Even if we were to find funding this year to upgrade that interchange, it would be years before it ever happened. So it's a chicken and egg. Which one's going to happen first? Councillor Alexander, I saw you had your hand raised, and we do have 15 minutes left in this session.
I'll be quick. The traffic study, no doubt, covers many points and algorithms and so on. It's probably based on the traffic that development would create, correct?
The study is based on existing conditions plus growth of those existing conditions plus the traffic that development would create.
So it's taking into account all the trucking activity that's going at those intersections, of course.
Of course.
Okay. Did it find any inconsistencies with that trucking traffic, or are these numbers based on that being consistent to what it can handle?
I'm not positive of that detail. Nothing jumps out at me in memory. It's been over a year since I reviewed that, and I don't recall any.
Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions? I want to say that when I looked at the traffic study, the traffic impact analysis, I was actually pretty impressed at the data points and the collection where they were at, down to the fire station, beyond, on Willamette Street, and of course at the interchange where most of the traffic would be. But they went out through the commuter lanes of the town and used those as counting points, which I believe are very important. So it's a statement.
It definitely was, and it probably wasn't the happiest day for the developer when we received a traffic study and said, oh wait, we didn't get a chance to weigh in on scoping. We need to add these intersections. And that was something that was added by the city to look further out away from the freeway.
Excellent. Questions or comments? Fox.
I hate to make anyone cringe, this is for Gary, but, you know, if there was a concern about the overall, based on my first question, business development and according to plan, it would be better to specify, you know, lower light poles rather than allowing the 40-foot and questioning it later. So you would change the building code prior to anything. Is that correct?
You have enough control right now in site design review to make those determinations.
Okay,
In other
thank
words,
you.
without changing the building code or any other standards. If they came in and they had 40-foot light poles, I think the city has more than enough flexibility in applying these regulations to tell them to do something different to accomplish the same goal.
And what about noise? Because there was an issue with some of the commercial areas with noise and neighbors.
Well, in the site design standards, there's a specific section, I'm reading it now, sound transmission, vibrations. There's specific standards for light industrial and campus industrial, which are the same. Maximum dBA is 65. Again, your control over screening and buffering can reduce the sound impacts on neighboring properties. I think noise
Thank
is actually one of the easiest impacts to mitigate, in my experience.
We also have a separate city ordinance that specifically deals with noise that we learned from our current light industrial park. So we've addressed it before and learned our lesson. I will say that personally, my experience after planning commission and counselor and a mayor, that the process of trying to write down everything and say, thou shalt only have 20-foot light poles and thou shalt have this specific type, gets you into a lot of trouble, because then when you sit down with the developer and as soon as you think you've got it all covered, the developer comes in or a neighbor comes in and says, here's a problem. And what we wrote down there doesn't address it, or it makes it worse. And so having the subjectivity of dealing with the lighting to make sure it works for the neighbors is better than trying to write down that you're going to put a 10-foot pole or a 20-foot pole or a 35-foot pole, and you're going to have this specific kind of lighting. I think it's just more important to be able to have that discussion and say, this is what Coburg is looking for, particularly in your site, that we would like to see in your lighting, rather than trying to sit down and write a code that addresses every small detail like that. I see Brian and then Councilor Alexander.
I just want to make a point about the lighting. I think that developers, all developers, probably look at the bottom line. And if you told them you would, rather than put in a 15-foot light pole that casts down instead of a 40-foot light pole that casts down, I think they'd probably go with that, just on the principle it's going to save them a lot of money.
They'd probably need a lot more light poles though to cast the same amount of light.
So fire chief is going to leave and he wants to make sure if there's any questions for the chief before he leaves. And I see Councilor Alexander.
This might address him just before he goes. The traffic study obviously is done not just on the exit and entrance of the freeway by the proposed annexed land, but it's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, and it might be a redundant question, I don't know, but I'm just asking, Does it also take into account how much traffic will reroute because they won't want to use the freeway with that many trucks? Does it take into account the other entrances and exits that go by the fire station, that come in from County Road by the campsite? And of course, the hazelnut fields on the other side, so along Coburg Road. Does that traffic study take into account of the amount of traffic that will probably be rerouting to those entrances or exits because of the amount of traffic on the bridge?
Not each and every one that you mentioned, but the furthest extent intersection that was looked at was the
I can't hear.
again, as I was answering earlier, the intent of a traffic study doesn't get down into every one single trip. It's more of a bigger picture. Is this intersection going to have so much more traffic that it needs a traffic signal? Or is this approach to this existing traffic signal going to be so overwhelmed that it needs a second lane approach or something like that?
Okay, and that's what I thought. So it's basically based on the area that is being discussed, not the outlying areas.
Right. Well, that the area that's being discussed, that pretty much encompasses the entire city, up to the edge of the city limits in each direction. And then in this case, currently outside the city limits to the edge of the development.
Okay, I was just curious how it was going to affect the fire station area, of course, for their efficiency, and then of course the entrance from Eugene. So the exit to Harrisburg and the entrance to Eugene, and I guess I'm hearing that those were taken into account on the study.
They were.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other final questions or statements? We have 5 more minutes. City Administrator Ann.
I think this question is for Brian and Damien, but it seems to me that in our code, it says that all utilities, it doesn't give specifics about what is required. It leaves it up to the Public Works Director and the city engineer to tell them what they need to install. And so I guess my question for Brian and Damien is, on the lights, wouldn't there be an ability for the Public Works Director to direct what kind of lighting they wanted in that neighborhood?
Want me to answer, Ryan?
I think we're probably going to answer the same thing. Yes, in public right of ways, Damien and I would, but I'm not sure about on the private side.
You're correct, Brian. That's really not, I guess, part of the jurisdiction of the Public Works Department to manage private utilities. Yeah, that's basically the answer. So no, I don't think we would be specifying or even type of pole or the type of fixture. However, part of the site review, when we look at things like stormwater runoff and such, we would be, you and I would be looking at illumination levels. That's the city, but not necessarily specified by the city. So as Gary was mentioning earlier, there are lighting standards in the code, and the burden on the developer is to prepare a plan demonstrating that they meet that standard. And then the staff would look at their proposal and make sure that it's consistent with that standard.
So I guess, Counselor Fox, when you're talking about lighting, are you talking about like street lighting, or you're talking about site lighting?
No, I was specifically about the light industrial on both sides of the highway, and business lighting, or private property lighting in the business commercial sense. I got it I look forward to us addressing that down the road.
Okay.
Specifies the height of the poles or their location. It talks about the final product. Basically, it says, all exterior lighting has to be shielded, reflected downward, minimize glare, prevent light trespass on adjacent parcels, other land uses, and street rights of way. That gives you a tremendous amount of control. Plus, you've got the vague.
I'm not getting sound.
Fox, did you say you didn't hear that?
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but Gary got totally muffled out. It's okay. I got the gist.
And this is again, something that we've really worked toward over the years to improve our codes and ordinances, to be able to have a little bit of subjectivity so that we can answer to the issues of each individual development instead of getting very specific. And so what Gary said was, we have a lot of leeway. It's not the specifics, it's the end result. What's the end product that we have? And light trespass and other things are big issues. I'm with you on that, Councillor Fox. I stare at a whole lot of lights shining off of the properties, and I agree with you, it's an issue. But I think we have the standard. We just need to make sure that we use that when the opportunity comes up. That's been one of the things we've missed, is in the discussion or in the plans as we go through them. We, as in commissioners and councilors, miss that opportunity to sit down with that developer and say, this is what we want for the end result. So on us to make sure that we do those things. 7:30. I'll give one final chance for anybody. We're going to close this joint work session. It's 7:31. We'll take a 5-minute break and open up our special meeting at 7:36. Hopefully.
Okay, thanks. Be well.
Hopefully you are required to register prior to the meeting. Hopefully provide testimony during today's meeting. Just a reminder that all materials that our meetings call Sammy. Here. Thank you. Agenda review. The mayor's comments. Looks like it's going to be a busy night and controversial subjects. I just want to remind everybody that as we go through this process, my goal is to be as educated as possible, to hear all sides of the concern issue and take that and weigh it and then make a good, strong decision from the information. I want to remind everybody that the decision makers here are residents. They live in this community. They pay the bills just like every other resident here. They live with their decisions just like every other citizen will. So hold that respect for us, and we're willing to hear what you have to say in a respectful manner. That will take citizen testimony. There'll be a limit of 3 minutes. I need you to state your name and address when you start.
There's no one signing. The public hearing or for citizen testimony?
Okay, thank you. We have no citizens' comment. For this portion of our meeting, we do have the hearing afterwards that we do have some signed up. It is 7:45 p.m. and I will now open the public hearing and hold the first reading of an ordinance A200-J. Ordinance A200-J, an ordinance annexing territory to the city of Coburg, identified as tax lot 00202 of assessors map 16-03-34-00 and consisting of 107.43 acres. And amending ordinance A200G to change the Coburg zoning map to rezone said territory from Lane County Zoning District Exclusive Farm Use, E40, to Coburg Zoning District Light Industrial. Following procedure will be used for the hearing. A staff report presentation, which I already know we will not have one. applicant's testimony, testimony in favor of, testimony in opposition of, applicant rebuttal testimony, and conclude the hearing. This is a quasi judicial hearing and will be conducted in accordance with the City of Coburg Code and state laws. I want to take a few moments to go over some required statements and tonight's process. If you wish to participate in tonight's hearing and have not signed up, you must do so now. Is there anyone who has not signed up and would like to speak?
Yes, this is Jay Poodle. I'd like to comment in favor of.
Thank you, Jay. The applicable substantive criteria that applies to these applications are included in the written staff report and will be identified and discussed in a staff report presentation. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward these criteria in the staff report or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or development code that you believe apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board based on that issue. At this time, I will call for any ex parte contact. I will state that in previous meetings, we have 3 ex parte contacts that have been recorded. And as I said before, all of these documents have been scanned and are available to the public from the website. I'll call for anybody that wishes to declare an ex parte contact. Hearing none, I will remind you, printed and attached, we do have ex parte contacts from myself, Mayor Smith, from Councilor McConnell, and Councilor Lehman. And these are in the record, again, on the website and present here. I call for a staff report. Do we have any staff report?
There's no staff report.
Okay. Applicant's testimony.
It's Raymond Fisher. And first, I'd like to thank the council for the opportunity to talk to you today. It's been a long process. We hope that we're able to share with you tonight and help you understand what we're coming from and give as much information as possible for your upcoming vote. Team consists of myself, Raymond Fisher, owner and developer, along with my dad, Ed Fisher, and our partner, Mike Stevenson. Tony and Eric Fabro are our civil engineers, and Kelly Sandow is our traffic engineer. Really, what I'm going to hit on tonight is really 4 things: the history of this development and where we've been, light industrial versus campus industrial as a zone, the master plan process from our perspective, and the financial impact of campus industrial. So let me just start off real briefly. The history, we in 2004, we developed the Diamond Ridge subdivision, and we partnered with the Stevenson family in doing that. It sold out completely in 2007, and it was right before the 2008 recession, which is a valuable lesson, is that you can have a really great project and still get really lucky and have great timing. So in 2010, we purchased this development property, and we knew that it was going to be a long-term investment. And we started going to the Coburg Crossroads meetings in Charetz during that time. And part of that 2010 Coburg Comprehensive Plan update was, public was very clear that they want what they wanted. They wanted the Coburg Business District to have the same character throughout, and any employment expansion should take place east of I-5. So in 2014 is when the urbanization study was reopened, and that gave an opportunity to move forward with placing development land in the UGB. Where there was mutual interest of Lane County, Coburg, and ourselves. And so we began to work with Coburg to create a case for including the employment lands into the UGB. So we looked at Coburg and regional Lane County employment needs, not just Coburg. And we commissioned an economic study that showed Coburg would benefit greatly from industrial land. The biggest competitive advantage that Coburg has is the I-5 interchange. We could capture up to 30% of the regional need. We would offer Lane County opportunity to attract large employers, and we would be one of the prize industrial locations along the I-5 corridor. So we agreed to move forward with the UGB expansion. So we actually got approved in 2015 by the county and were abruptly appealed by Landwatch Lane County. And Landwatch Lane County appealed the adding of more than anything of the residential exception lands to the UGB. Our development, which is the employment lands, was not objected to, but wouldn't move forward without resolution of the residential issue. So LUBA found the only revision needed for our land was we needed to use updated numbers for our economic calculations. And then Coburg, after we discussed with them, opted to split the residential and employment lands apart. So Landwatch Lane County at that point dropped any appeal of the employment lands. So in 2017, we went back to Lane County and they approved the split UGB expansion of employment lands by a 5-0 approval. And that's not easy to do with that Lane County board at that time. So in 2018, Coburg approved ordinance A199G that placed the development land in the UGB and gave a light industrial plant designation. And in 2020, we applied for annexation and a land use change to the light industrial zone. So in 2022, we're in the middle of the application process. We met with the city to negotiate an annexation agreement. We created a traffic impact analysis to show the worst case scenario for traffic. We met with the Diamond Ridge neighbors, which led to an 11-acre buffer zone along the east boundary. And we met with neighbor businesses to the west to give our plan and alleviate any concerns they might have. So the Planning Commission then passed the annexation and zoning of light industrial. I think you're good. And I would give this more to give a kind of a detailed history of the thought and the work that went into this throughout this entire process. It wasn't just our team. It was the city of Coburg, LCOG, Lane County, ODOT, just a lot of players. And the other thing I really want to point out is there was a lot of community involvement throughout the process through Coburg Crossings and charrettes, urbanization study public meetings, Lane County public hearings, zoning subcommittees, city council public hearings, planning commission public hearings, appeals process that was actually we tested and were able to move forward with. And throughout this entire process, if anyone came to us, we would listen and try to alleviate their concerns. We've tried to have a cooperative process throughout, and I believe we've succeeded in doing that. So my next topic is what I want to really get into is the discussion of light industrial versus campus industrial. That's really at the heart of the discussions that you folks are having. Universally, campus industrial is seen as the zone for office space. And today, due to COVID-19, there is a reshaping of how companies use and invest in office space. The vacancies of office space are at all-time highs. And more importantly, companies have seen that an at-home workforce can work efficiently. It's really the worst time to own or build office space since the 1980s recession. Companies won't make a large capital investment into a zone that wouldn't be feasible. For example, companies wouldn't relocate entire businesses for just new office space. And the scale of a 20-acre parcel makes office buildings impractical. Office space generally has a 10 times more vehicle trips per square foot than light industrial. Office is 3.9 trips per 1,000 square feet, and light industrial is 0.4 trips per 1,000 square feet. So moving on to manufacturing, one of the issues that we see with the code especially is the campus industrial code states that no manufacturing is permitted where Air Pollution Authority has to issue an air quality permit. LRAPA issues air quality permits for any new commercial or industrial construction. Effectively, that means no manufacturing use would be permitted in the campus industrial zone. Campus industrial, known as an office space zone throughout the state, would then tacitly not allow any manufacturing. And zoning as campus industrial would severely limit the potential uses and create a development which the market just doesn't want. As far as end product, 40% open space requirement for campus industrial versus 20% open space for light industrial. 40% sounds like it's more beneficial. But however, for a 20-acre lot, if you can just picture it, that would be 8 acres of open space. It really makes it untenable. It doesn't make it workable, and especially for office buildings. Campus industrial is more suited for smaller parcels in urban areas, closer to 1 to 5 acres. Demand. There is no demand for campus industrial properties, let alone 20+ acres in size. On Oregon Prospector, which is the state of Oregon's business prospect source, there are 137 properties larger than 5 acres currently listed as industrial. Only 2 are campus industrial. In discussions I've had with potential customers, all of them were interested in light industrial. Not one was interested in campus industrial. Business Oregon, who is the state of Oregon's business recruiter, was an early advocate of light industrial and helped to inform the 2018 City Council, Coburg City Council, on that fact. And I want to use a real world example. I mentioned last meeting that Bigfoot Beverage we're currently in escrow with as of May of 2021. Zoning of light industrial fits their company perfectly. They would be a great first user. Their water and sewer usage would be minimal, and I'll just kind of to follow up on the previous meeting. They wouldn't bottle their water from Coburg. They don't bottle there, so we can clear that up right now. So in essence, their water and sewer usage would be minimal, and they're a respected local company with long-term roots. But if zoning were campus industrial, Bigfoot wouldn't be eligible under the current zoning code. 40% open space would be economically impossible for Bigfoot, and they wouldn't pursue any further with good reason. So at this point, I'd like to bring up Steve Lee to give a little bit more background. He's got a lot more information about zoning in Coburg than I do. He knows more than probably anyone in the room. Steve redeveloped the Monaco complex into a successful business industrial park and created hundreds of jobs. We reached out to give his perspective on the different zone, and I'll turn it over to him.
My name is Steve Lee. I live at 4635 Spring Boulevard, Eugene. I'd like to start by saying what Mayor Smith said. I'm not a resident here, but I'm as close as anybody. 28 years ago, I stood down the vacant land with John Laputi. I graduated college with. And Monaco was looking there, Harrisburg, and North Bend and Indian Casino land. Picked that place, and I just started Lee Estates out River Road. And yeah, I think I can help. That became Monaco. 8 years ago, it was vacant and you had nothing there. My wife and I took a gamble, bought it back from Navistar, and I'm pretty proud of what we put in there. And I think we've been a good neighbor for the 28 years we've been around. I will say with the campus industrial, the best example, just to give you why you don't want to go that way, is I'm sure you've all seen the new development we did when we got the city sewer. We built the 50,000 feet. I think it's pretty nice in the swale, and we put the sidewalk and thing. I had the head of Springfield Develop over here about 5 years ago because we wanted to put more stuff. They have that whole stretch in Glenwood, the Wildish property, and showed them this. We have the nice storefronts. They're flexible. They all came out here and it came back 100%. We don't want that in our town. That is not attractive, and that does not meet campus industrial. I wasn't warehousing really. We had some office and stuff, but they thought that was ugly. That cost $110 a square foot. To build that today's $225. We had to rebid a month ago. This town, we keep needing more revenue, and you're going to be shocked what the property taxes of these new development at land, $500,000 an acre, and development at $225 a square foot. I mean, that piece of property is going to be as much as everything down here on this half of the street. But campus industrial, it just doesn't qualify them, and that's what they think. And I know the Wildishes, they just sit on that whole thing. There's nothing to develop, and in their lifetime, they're not going to be able to develop it because it doesn't meet any standards. They want nice office towers looking out on the river, and that's not where the market is. I will say I drive by Bigfoot 3 times a day going back and forth. That's how I get to Spring Boulevard. You know, unless you're up at 5 in the morning, you don't see many trucks rolling in and out of there because they're gone by 7:30. And when I go home about 5 o'clock, they're already parked in the yard because everybody's done running their routes. And that's 150,000 feet that used to be the Emporium. So it's not a big thing. You just have to decide what you want. And I'm all for our city. And you know, you put a row of those cypress trees down there now by the trailer park and they'll be 50 feet high and everybody around town hides everything with them. And there's already a huge buffer, it looks like, in this proposal from the trailer park. And I'm sorry, it's the trailer park, you know? But I mean, I'm for Coburg as much as anybody. I think I've did as much as anybody in the years. If you're going to develop the property, don't just land bank it and put all our money into improvements and never get any property tax money back in the next 10 years. That's just don't bother doing it. Just say, I don't want anything before you do that, please. But thank you. And thanks a lot for the great home. I love it out here. This is my second home. Everybody talks about Eugene. It's like Larry, I says, I don't know. I don't go into Eugene. I get on I-5. I eat up here. I buy my little shopping stuff. I know the grocery cart owners, they put in my little snack food I want for lunch because I know what I want in there. This is my home, folks. I don't want anything bad to happen here either. So thank you for all you do, all of you, and your work and volunteerism. I know how much time I used to be on the city budget committee to say, Eugene, it's a hard job you do. Thank you.
John Brown, he's an industrial land broker with Evans, Elder and Brown. Over the past 45 years, John has been involved in these type of developments as a broker and appraiser, and he can give a unique perspective of what I'm about to talk about with the history of campus industrial, because he's been involved in a lot of these projects. So, John, thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is John Brown. My business address is 101 East Broadway, Eugene, 97401. Also for the record this evening, my comments this evening should not be construed as a position from any board or commission position that I do hold, because I do hold several. That said, I've lived in this area for over 70 years. I saw them build I-5, so I've been around a little bit, but also I've been an appraiser for 30 plus years and then a broker for 16 beyond that. So I've got some experience with what's going on here. I don't have any present or future contemplated interest in the outcome of what you're doing here or anything. I've just met several of these people this evening. My business partner does have an interest in it, but they've asked me to comment on this because of A, my experience, and B, my neutrality. But I will tell you one thing and cut right to the chase. If you want to land bank it, designate it campus industrial and use Chad Drive as an example. If you've been here long enough to remember when Data General and Hewlett Packard tied up all that property the Romania owned and everything such as that, where Shopco and Costco and all those in the Register Guard are now. We had the big fight. Hewlett Packard went to Corvallis and the land sat there vacant, undeveloped for 20 plus years. The Gagniers owned it. And they just planted radish seed on it, put it in farm deferral and land bank. That land is still undeveloped, that 20 acres between Coca-Cola and the Register Guard, because it's 20 acres of special light industrial, campus industrial, whatever. The rest of the land out there, the little 3 and 5 acre pieces that are special light industrial or E1, E2, have recently sold. It's going to be an Audi dealership and it's going to be developed, but it took a year and a half to get that developed just to rezone it from E1 to E2. Those zones in West Eugene, in the Green Hill Technology Park, Chad Drive, and Springfield, are what I call the kiss of death. They're extremely challenging to analyze. They're so restricted on uses and users and so prescriptive that the market just shies away from them. It was a breath of fresh air to hear your mayor say this evening that if you get into a master plan and it gets too prescriptive and you get too black and white and you don't have gray and you don't have interpretive, that people will walk away, it'll cost you. Trust me, it will. The city of Springfield and Marcola Meadows just had to redo their master plan there that they did. It's $240,000 to do it. It sat there vacant for 12 years after it was foreclosed upon because it was so prescriptive they couldn't redo it. There's many more examples, and I won't take your time this evening, but I do want to thank you for your service. And my conclusion is that my recommendation is if you can avoid campus industrial, I certainly would avoid it. Thank you very much.
That's a good way to tie into what I wanted to talk about next, which is the campus industrial history in this area. Councillor Alexander in the last meeting asked if we were scared of what campus industrial might be versus what it is. And the best way to answer that is to show the history of campus industrial in this area. So campus industrial that I'm going to talk about tonight is the Green Hill Industrial Park, Chad Drive by Costco, and Gateway by FedEx. Next slide. You can see that this is the Green Hill in West Eugene. It was first subdivided in 1998. It was an E1 campus industrial zoning, and it had limited uses similar to the Coburg zone, but it only had 20% open space requirement, which is different than Coburg. Next slide, please. The first building you can see, and this is 2000, is now the Rosen Aviation Building. It was built there. You can see that they've already started to put in their roads. Next slide. In 2006, you can start to see even more. The roads are pretty much fully in to what they are in the present day, with Western Beverage and Harvest House now there. Next slide. Here's 2011. You can see Market of Choice, which is to the left of those other buildings. It's just beginning construction. And this is the same year when bankruptcy proceedings began for the developer. There hasn't been any new development since 2011. And if you look at if you want to go to the next slide, this is what it looks like today. You look to everything north of that main road is all owned by the city of Eugene and Lane County, based on for bankruptcy sales. Oh, which one is it?
It's a pointer.
Oh, where's the pointer? Big button. So that one.
Oh.
Not working? Okay, fair enough. I was starting to feel silly, so. Okay, next slide, please. So the takeaways from that is it was a very expensive build out, and it wasn't done in stages really. A lot of the infrastructure was built. There were properties purchased that didn't have any development at all, including VersaLogic in 2007 and the Nazarene Church in 2008. The open space was 20%, not Coburg's 40%. And there hasn't been any new development there since Anheuser-Busch. The developer went bankrupt. And it demonstrates the risk associated with any development, that you need as many ability to be flexible as possible, because you just don't know what's coming. And importantly, this was Eugene's really promoted success story in 2000. This was going to be a new type of development, and the strict use requirements made it almost impossible to develop. Next slide, please. So next I'm going to talk about Chad Drive, which John just talked about. I'll keep it pretty brief. First subdivided in 2000. And you can see it's basically the Register Garden, a place called the New Horizons Cafe. The next slide shows in today, present day, they did get the VA hospital in, which is good. But between the Coca-Cola and the Register Guard there, like Steve said, is they're now actively, they've changed the zone from E1 to E2 because they couldn't get it to do anything during that time. So it's finally moving, but that's really the only development in that area in 22 years. And we'll next move on to the Gateway in campus industrial. So this is Springfield, a little different. First subdivided in 1993. Next slide. It has a C1 campus industrial zoning, which is, it has some more uses than Coburg does, but the campus industrial zone, but it's also a 35% landscape requirement. So you can see in 2003 that you had a lot of development right off the bat. It was Sony came in and developed in the lower right corner. Symantec developed right next to it in 2003. The long building there is FedEx. Richardson Sports is next to that. And then Pacific Source is the small building right just north of Sony. And so if you look to the next slide, you can see this is in 2011. The building that's right next to Richardson's there is the Haas building. It's a very nice office space that was built in 2007, and COVID has driven down the office space values across the board so much. The restaurant and the coffee shop there are closed, and it's a large percent vacant as of more than 50% as of right now. In the next slide, Selco, the little piece right next to Pacific Source there, was developed in 2014, and there's been no development there since 2014. If you also notice, let's try the next slide. In the upper left corner is Royal Caribbean, the call center, which is vacant at this time too. It's going to be quite a while until you find anybody to go in there probably. And even the old Symantec is having trouble filling spots in it too. So there's what the takeaways there are. Next slide. It's first subdivided almost 30 years ago and still only 50% developed. There's more available uses than Coburg. And Sony and Symantec were early success stories. But when they left, the vacancies have been hard to fill and many jobs were lost. The Haas building, developed in 2007, is a great picture of what office space looks like. COVID has driven down tenancies and office space values, and it's a large percent vacant. No development in that area since 2014. So what really kind of also shows is that the early successes in Gateway are businesses that are more suited to campus industrial, like office buildings, small lots, and inside urban areas. So just to sum up, there limited success in those three areas where Green Hill ended in bankruptcy. I don't want to end up bankrupt on this property. Chad Drive only had one development in 20 years and needed a rezone to get anything else developed. And Gateway, the smaller parcels and more uses led to early success, but the office space in that area still is not in demand. And I think in the current environment and with the zoning restrictions, campus industrial would also fail with this development. Next slide. Yeah. Councilor Alexander in the last meeting also asked how the city can rely on us to bring forth good end users. And I think Gary and Henry covered it some today, and the mayor is, besides we've had a good working relationship over the last several years, we can't move forward without the city's approval of any end user. We need to bring only end users who fit. I've had phone calls with prospective end users who are closer to medium industrial. I told them it's not going to work. I'm not even going to bring that to anybody's attention at this point. So the way that we look at the master plan process is we would present something to the city for review, and really two types of changes. There's the no cost changes, like trust me, whatever lighting you guys want, we will put in. It doesn't matter. But we move features around. We would make corrections to our plan. We would have the preference of the whatever preference the city might have that would be no additional cost. We would be willing to do that to make everybody happy. But there's also negotiations. Let's say an end user wants a bigger building. But the city would like more employee recreation areas. That's a trade-off that we can work on, and we look forward to doing that. Next slide. Bottom line is the developer, the end user, and the city all have to agree before we can proceed, and it's a collaborative process. Give a kind of a real-world example of that, even before we started the master plan, of how we tried to collaborate. The city came to us, and Heath reached out to us to proactively, let's go talk to the Diamond Ridge neighbors about our plans. And as we walked the property with them, we came to a concept of creating a buffer zone that couldn't be touched once annexed. So if you look at our drawing there, it's the shaded area with the diagonals that totals 10.8 acres. And after talking with them, obviously they want to be protected from noise and light. And so we decided that is something it's going to protect a lot of the trees that are already there. It's going to give them that natural buffer. And it was something that we were willing to do as part of open space. And in fact, after the planning commission meeting in November, a Diamond Ridge resident asked if we could extend the buffer more at his property line, which we did by doubling it. So that was always the process that we tried to take, is listen to what people wanted early on. And then I think the mayor's mantra that he keeps saying is that it's easier to fix with pencil and eraser than concrete. Let's work on these problems ahead of time. And that's how we feel the master plan process can work. So finally, I want to just touch base on the financial impact of campus industrial and just give kind of the costs that go into a development of any kind. With this development, almost everything is spent up front. We have, before we can even begin construction, we have legal expenses. We have civil engineers, we have traffic experts and studies. We have wetlands experts, we have permits and fees, and just a whole host of things I can't even hardly keep track of. But once we're approved, it even gets worse. We have wetland mitigation. We have to build the road with right-of-way, excavation, rocking, asphalt, sidewalks, and lighting. We have sewer, water, and power lines that we have to put in, and millions of dollars are spent before the first sale can be made. So if the zoning ends up being, if you vote for a campus industrial, we don't see it viable to move forward on a project that we know would fail. With demand would start breaking ground as soon as we were issued a wetland fill permit. So it's really stark the difference, because I think my two experts that know a lot more about this than I do, campus industrial just is not going to fit for this property. So in summary, I just want to say thank you for the time tonight and throughout this entire process. We started in 2010 and we've methodically worked our way here. Today, we wanted to show the differences between light industrial and campus industrial. And we've shown the differences in the uses, the differences in demand, and we've kind of given a real world example of Bigfoot and how they would look at campus industrial versus light industrial. The best predictor of campus industrial success is what success campus industrial has done locally. In Green Hill, the subdivision ended in bankruptcy, and a majority of the vacant properties are now owned by Lane County and City of Eugene. In Chad Drive, it was subdivided in 2000. Only one development during that time, the VA hospital, and they have rezoned in order to compete for demand. And in Gateway, there's been no new development since 2014, with office buildings being the only development. And the early success with the light manufacturing that was there, but the shift to office space has led to stagnation. As far as the master plan process goes, we look at all of us as collaborators, and we're unable to move forward unless we all agree. And finally, if campus industrial is chosen as a zone, we just don't see a path forward financially to develop a large property with no demand. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you. And we'll answer any questions you guys have.
Councilor Alexander.
Thank you for taking the time to make that presentation. It is helpful to see that. My character assessment of you personally is quite good. I think you do care. I think you're a from the heart person. I do know that financial positives and negatives can help make our decisions. I do wish you lived in town. I do wish that more people involved live in town. I know that living in Eugene feels like you live in Coburg, but living in Coburg does not feel like living in Eugene. So what I would really just propose is that you continue with the character assessment that I think you have. I think you're a very good man, and I think you have a very good heart for what people care about. And you've been great up to this point. So I would hope that you would continue that and kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone who needs to live here, answer to the neighbors around, and possibly end your life here, because a lot of us will. So we're a small percentage of a population, but we have huge dreams of living in Coburg as it is now. So I appreciate the time you've taken, and thank you for your due diligence.
Might be remiss if I didn't answer one thing. Thank you for the compliment, by the way. But our partner, Mike Stevenson's been here for 70 years. So he wanted me to make a point that he's been here longer than any of us. So he gives us a good indication of what people of Coburg have always wanted. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to remind councilors that we're calling for questions, and comments are after the public meeting. We need to get through the testimony process. So I appreciate the comments, but we do have an opportunity at the end. Does anybody have a question for the developer? Counselor Blank.
Thank you for the presentation. Quick question on the wetlands mitigation. Can you just explain that? Because I guarantee that question.
Sure,
will come up.
we are halfway through that process where we have identified the total acreage of wetlands we have on the property. We're just right at 14 acres of the 107. And so what we have to do then is we are applying to fill all of those acreage and then pay for mitigation in a wetlands bank is the idea. So we're preparing our wetland fill permit. These things take a while. You're dealing with the Army Corps and the Department of State Lands. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we feel pretty good that we'll be able to fill those wetlands and move forward. Does that answer that?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that was just curious because I guarantee somebody's going to ask that question.
Oh,
So
sure.
the sooner we get to it, the better.
That's right.
Any other questions for the developer? Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.
Forward with testimony in favor of. I believe we had Jay Pudwell on Zoom.
Yes. Good evening. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is Jay Pudwell. I live at 90990 South Skinner Street in Coburg. It's the big green hedge for those of you that live around here. I have lived in Coburg for over 13 years now. We consider it our home. I know that still makes me a short timer for many of you, but I do think I also have a history of engagement with the city and involvement with the city and helping to develop the city in a way that everyone is respectful of all positions and all histories, shall we say. I mean, my time in working with city government, I had the opportunity to meet with many mayors across the state at a very wonderful conference called the Oregon Mayors Association Conference. And in those conferences, I learned in conversations that Coburg is in one of the most enviable positions of small cities, small towns across the state. And that is because of our I-5 proximity and our industrial resources, particularly Coburg North. And prior to that, Monaco. They have given us a tax base that enables our city government to operate in a way that far beyond what cities of comparable size are able to do. We just need to keep in mind the economic benefits that our industrial properties bring us, in addition to some of the other things we maybe have concerns about. In my professional life, I have a history of transportation engagement, expertise, or development and economic development. I work extensively with our fellow sister state agencies, DEQ with Department of Land Conservation, Department of State Lands. I also work for ODOT. And in that role, I've seen a broad range of opportunities. And I can wholeheartedly say that my entire team is in support of this project. Professionally, let's see, there are obviously concerns from a traffic standpoint. I do want to point out that the traffic generated by the east side will, by and large, stay on the east side. I know we have a lot of transportation problems through town. That is related primarily to residents that live west of town. Any of the new transportation generated by this development will, by and large, stay on the east side because that's where it's coming from. And it's also proximity to the I-5, which is what makes this development so important. We all want a new interchange. This development is not just a Coburg asset, it's a regional asset. The Coburg interchange likewise is a regional asset. The best way for us to get support for our regional infrastructure that we depend upon is to also develop the regional infrastructure or in the regional industrial areas that the rest of our neighbors depend upon as well. I'm strongly in favor of the light industrial rather than the campus industrial. Campus industrial and office space will come back, but we do not know in what frame or in what time frame or in what character. And we need the revenue and the economic development now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. At this time that we did get written testimony from Kristen Bartlett, Karen Corey, and Tom Bartlett, survey responses. And again, those were all downloaded onto the city website and available for public viewing. I have a list of 4 names, but I do not have whether they're for or against. So I'm just going to start at the top, and Kevin Dwyer.
Good evening. Am I not on camera? Here we go.
Here you go. We don't see you.
All right. How about now? There. Hey, all right. Well, I'm back again. It's an interesting conversation tonight about light industrial versus campus commercial. I think our main concerns over here are a couple of things. One is Mr. Fisher did say something to the effect that he met with the Diamond Ridge neighbors, but we are not satisfied. Hence, that's why Mr. Hayes and I are here tonight. We really think that any sort of, light pollution, noise pollution, odor pollution, traffic interferences severely impacts our quality of life on this side of the highway. I think that a lot of these concerns could be ameliorated by having, an additional green space, because that field is beautiful, and we hate to. Everybody on this side of the road hates to lose that. Another thing is we're extremely concerned at the condition of the overpass. You mentioned earlier that there need bicycles for access. There's no way bicycles are going to get across that bridge safely. The turning on ramps and off ramps on the east side are woefully inadequate. There's not been one semi-trailer that had made a turn that did not go over the lines or impact any of the crossroads that I've seen in my 2.5 years living here. Also, that's our only way in and out in case of fire. It's just not reasonable to have a large industrial development, light industrial or otherwise, without improving the rest of the infrastructure that is going to be required. I understand the developer would like to, or will be required to develop a certain part of Van Dyne Road, but until the funding is available from ODOT, there is a huge gap from the speed limit sign that says N35 in the bridge, and that encompasses both sides of Van Dyne, where you can see the road decaying from the truck traffics going into the gas station, into the rented Cisco truck lot on the other side, and the area that encompasses the taco truck. So until that's finished, it doesn't make any sense to develop 4 lanes of road to feed back into 2 to go into an inadequate interchange. I'm not sure where the traffic and all the business is going to go into Coburg, or whether or not it will have an impact on any hiring or employment of Coburg people. A relocation of the Bigfoot Beverage is just moving existing business from the south side of the city to the north side. I think that's not a net gain of anything for the region. I could be wrong. I might not be understanding this correctly, but that's sort of what I feel. So what we would like is for Diamond Ridge would be to have a responsible, ecologically sound and development of the area in conjunction with the highway overpass change. From what I understand, there's a meeting on the 24th that Oregon is going to have to talk about the $4.5 billion worth of infrastructure money that will be distributed over the next 5 years to the state. And it'd be really important for the Coburg to get involved, and anyone else that would like to get our needs known and get that highway fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. Next will be Paul Burrell.
Hello, can you hear me? Good to go. Okay. My name is Paul Burrell. I live at 33268 Selby Way. My entire property abuts the proposed lot number 4 and the annex property. A few things, I'm a business owner. I work hand in hand with the city of Coburg, allowing access to my land with the proposed water master plan pipeline. So I feel like we have a good relationship. But my main concern that has been brought up is that there's been no talk of buffer or green space on the south side of that lot, which is directly down my entire property. There's been talk of the RV park and Van Dyne, which I fully support, but nothing on the south side. So Raymond, I'm asking you that you consider that in your plan if this does go through, to give me at least what you're giving everybody else. If this does continue, I hope that the council and mayor and developers take everybody who lives here, who plans on staying here, their opinions very seriously, and the effects that it would take to property values, to congestion, to light pollution, noise pollution, ecological issues with Muddy Creek, all the wetlands, the environmental impacts with the elk herd, deer, turkey. I've never heard that brought up yet. Those animals pass through that property almost daily. I just think, in short, there is a way to make something like this work, but in business you can also make it work, or you can bite off way too much to chew. And it sounds like the transportation and congestion issues there's so many potentials that it could be developed, and then we find out about all the issues. The only place that I can get to my property is down Roberts Road. So by creating a whole bunch more traffic, let alone all the Van Dyne houses, I think there's 90 homes. It's going to create a giant mess right there on that intersection without that being redeveloped. I saw on the website for Coburg that Coburg values its small town attributes and wants to build on and preserve them. The community takes great pride in its unique identity, agricultural, historical, and river-based heritage, and strong sense of community. From what I'm hearing, the Van Dyne neighbors and myself and my other neighbor, I don't feel like there's been a strong sense of community and between the developers and all the residents who live here. Council, I urge you to really think about the adverse effects for all residents of Coburg and surrounding residents. Think if this was your property, your investment, the view that you have currently, and the future of living here. Thank you.
Mr. Burrell. Tom Bartlett.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Tom Bartlett. I live at 32919 East Mackenzie Street. And I would like to thank the mayor and the council for the opportunity to speak about the annexation of the employment lands in question. If you ask Coburg residents old and new, Coburg has a good quality of life. We have an accessible, responsive city government, a local police force, and a local fire department. What's not to like? However, this annexation and rezoning will degrade our quality of life by increasing light pollution, noise pollution, air pollution, traffic, and domino developments. I agree with Councillor Fox that tall light poles will be a major detriment. Even though this has been discussed, I would like to explain. I work for a forest products company with just a few light poles of 50 feet in height. The light glow can be seen from very far away. The allowable uses of light industrial, there will be an additional noise issues with car traffic, trucks, yard equipment, manufacturing racket, and general noise. Our fellow residents of the premier RV resort will get it from both sides, the freeway and now the industrial zone. In my opinion, a big negative of the light industrial is a lack of required air quality permits. Many old-time residents will remember the paint fume issues experienced with Monaco. Without stronger requirements, this could be a big deal. An increase in traffic would also be the most recognizable detriment of this development. A lot of attention has been paid to the outdated overpass and freeway off-ramps. However, I am confident the traffic downtown will be dramatically affected as well. This past weekend, I was sitting with an acquaintance outside on Willamette Street. We were both amazed at the amount of traffic going by. And he said to me, it wasn't like this 2 years ago. The last obvious quality of life detriment resulting from this annexation is the domino development I see happening. A conservative estimate of 10 employees per acre for this new development would result in over 1,000 new employees to the area. One can easily surmise that the Umpqua tribe land adjoining the property and the highway commercial at East Pearl and Industrial Way would be developed to support the influx of new workers. Think Starbucks, Panera Bread, etc. Let's avoid the I remember when conversations with friends and family. I remember when that area was a green pasture. I remember when I used to see the elk herd in that field. I remember when geese used to land there. I urge the city council to vote yes on the quality of life and vote no on ordinance A200J. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Speak.
Hi, my name is Andrew Hayes. I'm a former resident of Coburg and currently a resident of the Diamond Ridge subdivision, also a registered architect, retired. Again, I want to express a public thank you to the commissioners for their service. I was a planning commissioner for many years in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I know firsthand the huge amounts of time taken beyond all the meetings that you guys put in. Back in July, we looked at the current parcel study area 8, suitability for light industrial, and made a determination that about 60% or more of the perimeter was residential, which is contrary to the land use patterns in other similar communities, and indeed to Coburg itself, which has kept virtually no residential right next to light industrial. We also looked at study area 7 north of Van Dyne, and we were able to demonstrate that the initial concerns about wetlands and floodplains were in reality non-issues, suggesting there was a much better place for light industrial. Finally, we demonstrated that the campus industrial would be a much better fit for area 8 because of the adjacent residential. Then in the subsequent meeting, we looked at a direct comparison between light industrial and campus industrial, and we focused on air quality, on unsightliness, and landscaping. And we showed a graphic which demonstrated that the amount of landscaping that would be due to campus industrial would be considerably more than light industrial. So, we also did sort of a what if it was your residence and you had a choice between, on the one hand, Herc Rental and Carry On Trailers as a neighbor versus Caribbean Cruise Lines and Trillium Health Care offices. So how did we get here after so much study? When I first looked at map 11, which is the original study, I noticed that at first there seems to be no conflicts with residential. Residential is identified as yellow. And the area here was pink and the area here was white. But then I looked a little more closely and I realized that this pink area is basically residential occupancy. It's people who live there. About 50% of that RV resort are permanent residents of Coburg. And the area over here, the edge of Diamond Ridge, is rural residential. So what happened here? Well, I think what happened was that for various reasons, 8 was chosen rather than 7. But 7, that area north of Van Dyne, is surrounded on one side by the freeway and on the other side by farmland. No conflicts whatsoever with residential. So my advice would be do the right thing. If you need to do something with your annexed area now, put in the campus industrial. It will take longer to develop, no doubt about it, but it would be worth it because of the proximity of residential. Go ahead and do your urban expansion, annexation, and zoning of the area north of Van Dyne, and make that the light industrial. It won't bother anybody up there. And it's a much bigger parcel. And it would give you some time because both these things will take time, both annexing the parcel north and developing campus industrial. But that'll give you time for the state to sort out the transportation, get a new bridge in there, and handle all the traffic. I think it will make it a much better place for to live in Coburg, and ultimately more economic sense for the city. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hayes? All we have, right, Ann? Tammy? It's rebuttal.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. And I think that the citizens that testified, it's always good to hear what other people are thinking. I first want to say that I think a lot of the citizens had or the people that were on that testified, they had questions about transportation, and I think it's valid, as we've kind of talked about today in the previous meeting, and in all of our meetings with Kelly Sandow, our traffic engineer. This is going to be a staged process. It's going to be rather than getting hit with a lot of traffic at one time, it's going to be, we're going to develop something. We're going to see how it goes. And before we can develop anything else, we're going to have another traffic study to see how it works. So we're going to get these stop gaps in between that I think is going to give the city of Coburg the ability to know what you're going to require from us. You could very easily say based on the second or third development, say, hey, you need to start doing something with that overchange or that overpass because you're hitting it too hard. And that's something we understand. But I think that should help alleviate some of those concerns. I want to address Mr. Burrell real quick. If you can hear me, Paul, if you look at the screen, the upper right-hand corner is shaded that's what our buffer area is. So all those trees that you see that are really there to the north of that creek that runs through the property, that's all going to stay there. And as far as the rest of the boundary, we are prepared to do the same buffer that we're doing for the trailer park along that area as well. So you're gonna. I'm sorry that you weren't acknowledged as part of this process, but we're prepared to do the same thing. And you're actually getting more buffer than even the trailer park, because you're going to have all those trees that are going to stay there. So I hope that answers your question. For Mr. Bartlett, he mentioned that he's worried about the air quality permits. LRAP is going to monitor the air quality. They're not going to allow anything. You're not going to have a repeat of the fume issue that I've heard so much about. It's going to be pretty tightly regulated. And then with Mr. Hayes, there's been a couple of testimonies that he's had talking about study area 7. I was here when it was decided which area was going to be there. And number one, study area 7 has better farm soils. So as far as the choices of what was to be developed and changed from farmland into UGB land, the higher quality soils pretty much disqualified study area 7 from the beginning. So that's why it's not an option. And light industrial, there's been a lot of talk about light industrial not is because it's close to residential, it's a negative. Well, in the code here, it actually talks about what you need to do when light industrial is buffered up against residential. I think the buffer area is 50 feet for that, and everywhere across along the entire buffer zone there, we are more than 50 feet up to 300 feet. And so I think we've kind of covered that area, that issue of light industrial. But again, I think it's always good to hear that. I appreciate the input.
Thank you, Raymond. At this time, hearing all testimony, I will close the public hearing at 8:48 p.m. Gary, let's continue the hearing too, and then look at you.
March 8th.
March
This
8th,
is second reading.
your second reading, your normal starting time is 7 o'clock. Place City Hall.
The second reading of ordinance A 200-J is scheduled for March 8th, 7 p.m. at our normal council meeting. Thank you. Okay, at this time, councilors, get comments and statements and questions if you would like. Councilor Blaine?
I just want to thank everybody for speaking up tonight. It's definitely appreciated. Obviously, us all being citizens here, we know the effect that a good development and bad development can have. I think I just want to hit on the Diamond Ridge residents a little bit, that them being just outside of Coburg city limits, not really, helping with our utility costs, our tax base, knowing that we had a huge water sewer infrastructure situation here over the last 10 years or so, and us as a council really trying to knock that debt down to help alleviate that cost on our residents is a really important factor and some of our decision making. Adding a tax base to the industrial lands, in my opinion, is very important for helping our city and our residents. We hear constantly about the cost of water and sewer here, the cost of living in general. And that's because the bulk of that sits on our residents. So I think hearing from Diamond Ridge, it makes it a little difficult for me. I understand the buffer zone, but other than that, it's hard to feel too bad when we're the ones footing the bill. So I think, it really is important to realize that this is more than just, we just are pushing development for development purposes, for development's sake. There's a long-term gain here for Coburg. There's some short-term pain, of course, with any development, but not being able to control the state and when we're going to get funds to redo that interchange isn't really an option for us to just stop development completely. A lot of the traffic issues that come through our main corridors on the Willamette are coming through and out to Harrisburg and Junction City, and those are farmlands and a lot of farm traffic that we just don't have control of. We can't stop that until the county possibly builds a access north of us. And again, that's not really something we can decide. So I think those are all reasonable concerns, but ultimately, I think the development is something that is good for Coburg long-term. And I think if we have the control to adjust the lighting and adjust the facade and make sure that it fits, and we have buffer zones that protect the neighboring properties, I think we've done a very good job with that. And I think people need to realize that need to really think about long-term versus the short-term pain for the long-term gain here. So anyway, that was just my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Blaine. I would like to make some comments. My involvement with the city, I've lived here 35 years. I've been involved off and on with the city government for about 32 years, first as a planning commission member, and then up through the ranks as a budget member, budget committee member, many committees, and councilor, and now mayor. The reason I got involved in the planning commission was because I wanted to try and stop growth in Coburg. I loved Coburg the way it was, and that's the way I wanted to keep it. When I became a member of the planning commission, I believe it was probably Gary Darnielle that told me, well, that's really nice that you want to stop growth, but the state law says you have to plan for it. And that was good information. It's all about planning for it, because you really can't stop growth. The Oregon law does tell the cities to plan for growth and expect it. That's what keeps the rest of the state beautiful. That's what keeps the farmlands. That's what keeps our green spaces. So I've learned that lesson. And the issues that Coburg, the lessons that Coburg has learned over the years is planning is so important. One of the things that we hear, you may have heard former Mayor Jay Pudwell say he's heard other cities say Coburg's way ahead of the game. We're ahead of the game because we learned a lot of lessons. They were hard lessons. Monaco taught us a lot of things. All of the developments have taught us one thing or another. And planning is the answer to the big problems. And I have spent an awful lot of energy as a commissioner, as a councilor and a mayor to try and get our planning to the point where I feel comfortable with it, where it protects that small town feel that we want to have, the safety that we have in Coburg, and to pay our bills. I was part of the initial discussion with the UGB and Lot 8 and Lot 7, Parcel 8 and Parcel 7, and the discussions that went on there. The other part of this is the financial aspect, and why this is mentioned so many times, as Mr. Darnielle mentioned, in our comprehensive plan, because we planned for this years ago, literally 2 decades ago, we started planning for this because we pay the bills. We knew there was a $30 million sewer investment coming up. We had 1,000 residents. We had to pay the bills. So, as I said before, with another group, took lemons and tried to make lemonade. We didn't like the fact that we needed to pursue development to help pay the bills. But if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to pay for our sewer. And that bill would be on the 1,000 residents and 85 existing businesses in this community. That's a pretty onerous lift for all of us. That's why this was planned over 20 years ago. And we're here now trying to deal with that. Do I like growth? No, I'd love to leave all the farmland and everything around. Will we stop growth? No. But can we control growth? And again, I've spent an awful lot of energy trying to get that control to a point where I feel comfortable with it. I feel pretty darn comfortable with it. We put a lot of energy. The master plan process gives us that subjectivity, gives us that end result instead of trying to write down every technical detail and measurement and small iota to try and get somebody to do something right. We have a little subjectivity with our processing now. We have input at the beginning in the pen and pencil stage where we can use erasers instead of at the concrete stage where we have to use jackhammers. So believe in our planning process. I feel pretty secure in it. Is it perfect? No. But I think it's continue to improve it. We already have a list of suggestions for changing some of our development code for ordinances. And we'll follow through with those because we want to do this right. I believe in the developers. I think they've worked very hard to listen to Coburg and outside of Coburg, the neighbors that aren't in the city, and provide what a good neighbor should. The best thing that we can get out of the issue. It's lemons, but can make lemonade and we can make something work. The city of Coburg needs that tax base. That's why this has been planned for. We need that fee structure from water and sewer to help us cover the bill for a $30 million plant. We're in the middle of a $5 million water system upgrade, and it's not because of that developer, it's because of many things, including this potential developer. So those needs are there. And again, I believe in our planning commission, I believe in our staff, and I believe in this council to make the right decision. I think we've got good checks and balances on our planning process. And I think the kudos that we get from other cities is hard earned. We have 19 staff members in this little city, and we get one heck of a lot of stuff done. And I think we're doing a good job. I will say that in the 35 years I've lived here, I don't think this town has been more pleasant and more enjoyable than it is now, in spite of the pandemic. We have healthy businesses. We have people that walk the streets, live in wonderful homes, and enjoy this community and love this community. And we put a lot of hard work in to get there, and I think we're going to keep it that way. Thank you. Mr. Fox, did you want to speak?
Yeah, it went dark for a second. So I was encouraged by all the presentation and the passion of the various peoples who presented, and it echoes a lot of the silent people out there that have cares but don't always speak up at public meetings. I remember going door to door on the north part of Coburg where I had reached out knocking and hearing about some concerns about the industrial area and how we're working to mollify it, mitigate it. And I just want to get to a point where we're not mitigating after the fact. So I look forward to the income that this area, which will be well planned and well vetted in its development, that it will bring in, and it will be a positive to all. I know, the one thing we need the overpass. I don't see a ton of additional traffic going through town unless they're coming to eat lunch or dinner, because I-5 is the major corridor, but that could just be my perspective. But I will be a thorn in the side about, the light poles and the noise modification and planning on that, because I never even heard the term dark sky until I was knocking on doors, and one of the residents asked about the Hayden development, why there are no streetlights, and I believe it was the city administrator that said something about dark sky, and then I spoke to her, but we don't have dark sky stuff, but I've researched it a lot, and there's a town in Texas of 950 people that has a dark sky ordinance, and it's not about how much luminous you have, but it's about how much you work to mollify it, and I think we could get there. So anyhow, I was very encouraged tonight, and I think we could abate a lot of the concerns with.
Counselor Fox, and I want to root you on for that dark sky thing, because I sit on my front porch and I have lights from our light industrial area staring at me all the time. So go for it, Counselor.
Well, all right.
Just a second here.
Have a battery control issue, but it's being dealt with.
Sorry, I had to plug in. I do want to address additionally the interchange. I will tell everybody here that right now, the interchange at Coburg on I-5 is in the top 4 list for the region here for funding. There was lots of discussion about that, and I don't mean to badger or quote anybody, but the issue that stirred me was a statement from somebody that said, this bridge has been on this list for 25 years and it hasn't been touched. Why are we even messing with it? We need to find something else to do. Obviously, that didn't work for me. It's been on the list for 25 years for a reason. And Coburg is blessed with a great transportation group that we meet. Former Mayor Jay Pudwell, who works with ODOT, is one of those. Our planning commissioner that was here earlier, John Marshall, is on the Lane County area transportation committee. And then Councillor Fox is a representative to the Lane Act, which is the advisory committee on transportation for the general Lane rural area. And I represent Coburg on the Metropolitan Policy Organization, which is the federal based transportation for the metro area. So we have a lot of irons in the fire in the transportation. And I have been initiating letters and phone calls and conversations to our elected state officials and our federal officials and the county. And at this time, Commissioner Buck knows me well and knows the bridge well. So that issue, even though it's a long ways away, it's still in the top 4 in this region for update. And I think nobody can deny that it needs to be updated. Any other comments or questions? Statements?
This is Nancy Bell, and I'd just like to again thank everybody for their input. I also need to echo what Councillor Blaine has said, what Mayor Smith has said, what Councillor Fox has said. This is not an easy decision to make, but growth is inevitable. And I think that managing the growth, managing the income to the city that this type of growth will bring is absolutely imperative. A cousin of mine once said, you know, if people say, well, we don't want to change, we don't want to move forward. Well, if you're not moving forward, you're really falling backwards. And I don't want to see Coburg end up like some of the very small communities that used to exist in this area, some of the small communities that still do exist, but are getting smaller and smaller all the time. Coburg is a wonderful place to live, but in order for us to keep the standard of living that we've come to expect in this city, we need to continue getting more economic support from businesses and growth within the city. So I think we're all working towards the same goal.
I appreciate all the input. It is something that I think we all feel very, very deeply about. So thank you all.
Counselor Bell, it's written in the comprehensive plan, it's written everywhere. We want to maintain that small town feel. And every one of us say it all the time and we mean it. So we're trying to do everything we can to get through the bureaucracy and stuff and keep things livable. With faith in our developer. And I think we have that understanding when we meet right up front with them instead of waiting for the public hearing and then everybody says, oh, it's all planned and done. That's not going to happen here anymore. So I think we're on a good progress with moving forward to do things right in this community and keep doing things right. And I look forward to hearing more from our staff, our citizens, and making a good decision in the end. And I'll give one more chance to counselors for any questions or comments. Counselor Alexander.
This is off subject, but it is, and this, so I apologize if this is not the opportune time to do that, but we did not do a pledge of allegiance as far as I know. Did we?
Let it.
Well, I missed it then.
We did, it was muted. The sound was really off at that point in time.
Okay. That's all I wanted to say right now. I think I've said enough tonight. I am in no way afraid of growth, but I am afraid of growth with our eyes closed. So that is it.
Definitely. Thank you, counselors. I'll give one last chance to any staff that may have questions or need anything further from this meeting. This meeting is done at 9:07. Thank you.